To what extent, all of you have discussed your networks. What advice would you give sort of commensurate with that, with sort of maintaining your reputation, and what do you do to establish a reputation in your network?
Be true to your word.
Every relationship that has been meaningful has come from either like working together on something or working for somebody. It's from the beginning, I think, just finding a connection and finding something that, make them like you and be friends and have that be independent. I feel like there's a gulf between lobbyists and the Hill, and it's very hard to be friends with lobbyists when you're on the Hill.
I was pretty good at making friends on the Hill.
I believe you. But one of my closest, I don't know what to call them, contacts.
Associates.
Is a lobbyist and is a former Dorgan staffer. But we formed a bond on the Hill, and when she left, I trusted her implicitly, and I would go to her for advice, and it was never a lobbyist-staffer relationship, even though that existed as well. And having that connection, I think, made the network aspect of it real and work.
I would echo that. Look, be true to your word. Don't lie to anybody. If you don't know, say you don't know, and you'll come back to them. Because this town, and specifically Capitol Hill, operates like high school. It is you take your high school and you put it in Congress, and it's the same thing. People know we live in a really small town for living in a big city, and everybody knows everybody's business. Everybody knows everything everybody does, who you work for, kind of what skeletons are in the closet. So just be honest. And, in this town, there's so many transactional relationships that when you find a genuine relationship, you become friends, and that network just grows and grows. It's those genuine networks that yield the biggest and most satisfying results.
I think that's true. So for Alex and Stephanie, you peeled off, you left the Hill. What do you think you took from the Hill that necessarily made you attractive off the Hill? And you can go first.
Oh, goody.
Come on, you know the answer.
Well, and I think it's what I alluded to earlier. I can't think of another way to put this. It's a little bit of a club. And the secret handshake is knowing how things get done. And the other secret handshake is knowing that you've been in the shoes of the people you're dealing with. And it's something that I always find tremendously interesting when I'm talking to lobbyists that have never worked on the Hill, that they are honestly quite surprised at their first visit to Congressman or Congresswoman X's office, and they're dealing with somebody that's a 25-year-old head of the appropriations process for that member of Congress. And that person can be brilliant and an expert, and Ryan, you can tell me if I'm totally off on this, 99% of the time has the congressman's ear. And so, or the chiefs of staff's ear. And I think that knowing how that place works, because it is very different. And for all the Sunday shows that you see, at least, and I left a while ago, so it might be a little different now, but for all the Sunday shows and all the Twitter wars, there is a very collegial atmosphere in a lot of senses. You find that members make friends on the floor. I once had, if you've ever been on the Hill, you know that there are member-only elevators and the senator-only elevators. And there's just a different kind of relationship. I was the only person standing there waiting for an elevator with this one senator, and we got in the elevator, and he's like, "Oh, well, who do you work for?" And I said, "Oh, well, Senator Dorgan." And he goes, "Which university did you go to?" And I said, "Well, the University of North Dakota." He's like, "Oh, you got to get out." Because he went to the University of Minnesota, and it's not who you think it is. But it's just all that kind of joking that you never would know unless you're there. And I think that having that understanding makes it's almost, I hate to say this because I know so many good lobbyists that never worked on the Hill, so many great public affairs professionals that never worked on the Hill. That knowledge is tremendously important. But that's what I think, from my perspective, the political management program, but really a lot from the legislative affairs program, it gives that knowledge that most people in town don't get unless they've worked up there. And political management is one of the best things about it. You get this world very much. Not nearly as in-depth and expert as these guys do, but we get that. But we also get the campaign world. So when you talk about the intersection between the policy and the politics, that's very much what the GSPM provides for a lot of us. But I think you guys have hit the head about what definitely makes you attractive once you leave the Hill.
So you've stolen my...
So sorry.
No, what Ryan said about this intersection, there are people on the Hill who become really smart about something, but they don't understand the politics of it, and that's big P and little p. So what is the impact on another senator of the same party or another member? What is the impact on another staffer? How did I treat that person? Who did I tell before I rolled this out? I mean, there's all these little nuanced things that are politics. And the successful people are the ones who do find that intersection. But what we haven't really talked about is what you do on the Hill, more in these roles than the press. Mm-hmm. And whether you're 25 or 35, you have an immense amount of material flying at you, and you have the news, and you have what's happening in Congress, and you have what people want to talk to you about, and what lobbyists think is the most important thing right now, and you have to process this and communicate it to your boss so that your boss can be successful and manage what they need to spend their time on. And figuring out how to do that with getting the politics right and understanding the impact is a skill that not every single person on the Hill figures out well. And once you've figured how to do that, it is translatable. So sure. I'm not in a role where people necessarily care that I know how the Hill works. I'm surrounded by people who that's their job, and my job is not related to that. But it helps that I understand what they do, but it also helps that I understand big P and little p politics of how to work and how to prioritize and how to triage and how to get people what they need without just handing them lots and lots and lots of words. So to me, that is the thing that makes me attractive, is that I can do that, or at least I think I can. Synthesize and then navigate.
I also think, so just one last thing,
yeah.
I think one of the other, when you leave the Hill, one of the things that makes you attractive from having that Hill knowledge, we talk a lot about the lobbyist staffer relationship, but there's also, and I would disagree, the press people are very busy. Just different, right. But it's, there are other aspects to this. Like if you were some sort of organization and you want a member of Congress to come and speak at your event, it's a heck of a lot more likely you're going to get that member of Congress if I can call Ryan and say, can your boss come and do this for us? I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not really asking for anything in particular related to legislation, but I've made this relationship, this issue here, but if I worked on the Hill, to A, understand who I have to call, B, understand that if my event is on a break week, there's no chance that the boss is coming. C, understanding that there's, this is impacting and, we plan on having this guy, but if there are votes at that time, may make it, may not make it, we may have to arrange it. There's so much of that information that impacts almost everything of Washington that is beyond the policy level. So that information is so helpful to have.
Understanding nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
One thing I would also add, we have 3 people here who have enjoyed working on the Hill. In my own experience, I worked on the Hill for a couple of years. I probably could have stayed a good deal longer if I'd wanted to, but I had an opportunity to leave. But I also found over the years, and among our students actually, there are people who go to the Hill, it's just not for them. It's okay, they end up doing other good stuff too, but there are a lot of people who go to the Hill and can't get enough of it, and 30 years later they wake up and they've had a career. So, what I'd like to do now though is sort of open for questions from the floor, anyway, if you would sort of tell us who you are and direct your question to any of us.
Okay, so my name is Jessica Smith. I actually graduated from North State Affairs program in 2011. And so my question is regarding the email that you sent to the lady. What was, not word for word, but what was like the content of the email? What was the ask after you caught her attention?
I think you can probably guess I'm a little irreverent in how I approach things. Once I got her to open the email, which is 99% of the battle, I think in any communications within our groups as well as communicating to Ryan and the folks on his staff, is getting them to open the email. But then it's really just a simple ask. And I'm really trying to think of a better way to say this. People in Washington love to talk about themselves. And I should want, someone that used to work with me is actually in the audience tonight, and so this will ring a bell for him. You ask people for coffee. A full-on ask, I'm looking for a job. It's a little harsh sometimes. And so what I was doing at the time was, to be entirely honest with you, I never thought I had a chance to work on Capitol Hill. I thought it was totally out of the realm of possibility. So I was basically just looking for information. Would you mind sitting down with me and having a coffee meet and telling me how you got to where you got to? And then saying, okay, well, I'm looking for this kind of job and this kind of job. And this, this portion of your background was really interesting to me because this is what I want to do. Just asking someone for a cup of coffee and asking them about themselves goes a long way in this town. And I think, additionally, when I did this, LinkedIn was just a glimmer in the mind. But LinkedIn's really important. And I tell people now, stalk my LinkedIn page. And if you see somebody that you want to meet, email me. And I'll say, okay, yeah, this person would, they're really open to meeting people. Great. And then, they're really busy. It's this time of year. It's not going to work out. But just keeping that network fresh and just asking people about how it's going to happen. And so the job I'm starting in a week didn't exist 3 weeks ago. And it really just started because someone had said, hey, do you want to come and do this? And I said, well, I'm a little more qualified than what this job offers. And like, well, can you talk to this person? I'm like, oh, absolutely. I've known her for years. She goes, well, this job isn't for you, but what if we did this and this and this? And now I'm starting a new job. And it was just because I'd had a coffee with someone. And I still do it. I will still find people that I don't know that I find interesting and be like, hey, you want to have a cup of coffee? And you never know where that's gonna lead. So that's my biggest encouragement. Just ask people to go out and have a cup of coffee. Be considerate. I don't think you want, you don't want to call somebody on the Hill at the end of session expecting them to have a cup of coffee with you because they're generally not sleeping, and if they're having coffee, it's because they're not sleeping. That comes from knowledge, and you've already been through the program, so you kind of get the world you're looking to get into, and use clearly your intelligence. So that kind of intelligence comes to play in asking people, and also finding those commonalities. Like when I got to say, it's not very, I think what I said to her, it's not very often that I find somebody that has led a mirrored life to mine. And then I told her I was Canadian, which was a whole other ball of wax. But just finding commonality, something that you can connect on, and then just asking them for their time. People are very, very generous with their time here. And another thing, I think, which you demonstrate all the time, people want to pay it. I don't like to say pay it forward because I look at that in a different vein, but you never know. It's both a very generous thing, of people saying, I will give you my time, but it's also a little self-insurance. Another adage in town is always be nice to the interns because they could be your boss. And that's very true in a lot of respects. So just keep at it. I know it can be frustrating trying to get doors open, but they'll open at the most unexpected time in the most unexpected places.
That's a good point. There are a couple of my students I'd like to work for these days. Anyway, other questions? Come on.
So first of all, Stephanie, I'm from Canada too.
Oh, yay.
I've got a Canadian flag tattoo to prove it.
Oh, I can't do the tattoos for your pain.
But I've lived here most of my life. I guess the question I have is I had a career already, in business, I'm an attorney, so I'm a legal career. I guess the question would be, working in the private sector all that time, how is that perceived as you're trying to enter this field? And are there any sort of translatable skills that people say, oh, well, he's done this, he's done that, so he can do this? Or is it starting fresh? Or is it maybe even a hindrance to say, okay, you've got all this built-in expertise that just doesn't fit in here?
I just actually had this conversation, and I'm going to leave this to you guys because I think, and this is the advice I've just doled out, so hopefully you guys are going to reinforce it. I think it's absolutely possible to have a career. Correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen. I think it's probably with someone with an extensive background already. I think that's more suited to the Senate with bigger staff, bigger budgets. But committees in the House always employ experts. I think it's very possible to have a political career in Washington.
One of the challenges is getting a job on Capitol Hill as a Canadian. It is. Yeah, I mean, Stephanie's great living proof. I mean, for people that want to work on Capitol Hill, it was a tremendous accomplishment. Foreigners don't get jobs easily on Capitol Hill.
Right.
Bottom line, and I mean,
Well, I think
God knows. I mean, I got a couple jobs for Spaniards a couple of years ago, and people thought I'd moved heaven and earth. I did move heaven and earth to do it.
But I think, well, for me, it was, and let me preface this because this is on video saying I did not say these words. I was talking to an editor for a paper in North Dakota, and we were chit-chatting, and I try to couch things very interestingly because sometimes I will say things that sound very Canadian. I do use the word Chesterfield quite often. And I was like, oh, well, I'm just from up Highway 83 and, blah, blah, blah. And she started talking to me about this restaurant. And then she said, hold on a second, you're Canadian. And I said, yeah. She goes, at least you're not from New Jersey. And I think that's a very, you working for your same district.
Yeah.
The understanding who you're dealing with and that connection is so critically important. And, after reading someone's bio or, if you want to work on the Hill, there are some skills that are very transferable. Being counsel and understanding the legislative process. Those are skills that, every office needs. And I don't even think it doesn't matter if you've got, purple feet at that point, that, it's a very useful skill. I think one of the things that in other capacities, and you guys know this better than I do, since you were both chiefs of staff, were chiefs of staff, subject matter expertise. When you're young, that's not such a big deal. Knowing the district, being from the district, right, or the state, big deal. But when you get older, as a subject matter expert, and you have a career to pull from as a subject matter expert. So I'll throw that back to you guys on how.
Look, when I do hiring, I think, it is different for a personal office versus a committee or a leadership office. And with your background, I mean, there's plenty of opportunities, whether it's, whatever your specialty in law may have been, at the Judiciary Committee or, in a parliamentarian's office or, working for leadership. But it's not unheard of. I mean, there's the great thing about working in Washington and is that there's never a set way to do something. People come from a multitude of backgrounds and a multitude of ways. So it's you just have to find what it is that you're looking for and be tenacious at going after it.
You don't want to just buckshot and apply, right? So networking is even more important, and being not just realistic, but also don't just be open to anything because it doesn't look right. If you have a career that you're leaving saying I'm going to answer phones, no one wants you to do that, but they're not necessarily ready to hire you without having a sense of what you're good at and who a recommendation. So network, to follow on the question of like what you ask in the email is never ask for the job in the email, or even necessarily when they agree to sit down with you, ask them about them and then ask them about the industry. And then to the extent it's about you working, it's where do you see me in on a committee? What committee? I've worked on this. What do you think that skill would be valuable? What committees? Once you get that sort of advice, it helps you network more and target what you're actually looking for. And a lot of those jobs are never posted, right? I mean, those are going to all be because somebody has recommended or someone knows you.
Before we move on, I want to say I love the state of New Jersey.
On camera.
Anybody else? Sure.
As working on the Hill, you understand the entity you work with, the lobbyists, public affairs firms, like you said. Can you kind of lay out the landscape of what other kind of organizations you work with, or go back and forth with, especially ones that have an interest in legislation for their organization if they work with? Like, who else would you work with as staff members on the Hill?
Trade associations, companies.
Trade association, companies, in-house, corporate lobbyists.
Nonprofits.
And contract lobbyists, hired guns, whatever you want to call them. And
Constituents.
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 Yeah. Constituents. Yes.
From Defiant.
Yeah.
Yes, and the one thing, look, I've always told my staff this, and people in Washington, you can kind of get inside the Beltway bubble mentality of, always inward facing of what the congressional office needs to do, and it's hard to constantly remain vigilant and be external facing, because we're here. I have to tell my staff all the time, we're here to represent 721,000 constituents, and those are the most important people. We can meet with lobbyists, we can meet with lawyers or press people or whatever, but the most important people are those constituents, because they're our customers. And you read any poll or anything like that, Americans have such a low opinion of their government, especially of Congress. I think we have something like an 8% approval rating. And people deal all the time with these corporations that provide great customer service, Amazon and Apple and Disney, you name a company, and people have a brand image. Well, our brand is our congressmen, and they're our customers, and they come every 2 years. Their vote is the currency that they come with. So whether we're talking with lobbyists or anything like that, we have to make sure that whatever we do is in the best interest of our constituents.
Were you asking more for different options for places to work? Is that kind of what you're looking for, or?
Because if you're not, if you thought about working on a hill, or maybe it's not so much for you, I know it may not be for some people.
Yeah.
Try to look at other avenues if you have an interest in legislation, and then you try to figure out the landscape, and so I wanted to know who you work with, and if somebody's not willing to work on a hill or can't, it's just not in their plans, how would they go about expressing their interest in following legislation?
I think there are nonprofits, like we mentioned, the trade associations, corporations. Think tanks that you can just work on policy and become. And we were talking a little bit in how you go a little bit of the reverse challenge. In just kind of going back to the Hill. If you become a policy expert in something off the Hill, then all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, well, maybe I do want to go to the Hill. It makes you very attractive to people on the Hill because you've already developed this expertise. And I think we realize that both sometimes the lifestyle is hard on the Hill. Sometimes it's not not your environment. Universities have people that evaluate policy. Understanding, back to the point of the nexus between policy and politics, but also understanding how policy impacts everyday life is actually a really important translation process. And that comes back to, we do it in Congress when constituent mail and newsletters and all that sort of thing. But there's also another way, we can't delve deep into those things when we're communicating with people. But that's where experts in think tanks and universities, all these different places that evaluate, that's where that really plays into the process. So there is definitely roles for people that are interested in policy, passionate about policy, but don't want to go to the Hill, and can have real impact on the process and the outcome of policy also.
Another place where a number of people who for one reason or another couldn't or wouldn't work on Capitol Hill, but were very interested in the legislative experience, is to go to the Congressional Research Service. CRS is it's a pretty good place to work, I'm told. I've talked to a number of people who've been there or who've developed very specific expertise, and everyone uses CRS, and they're a fabulous institution. I've had people ask me, gee, I'm having a difficult time finding a place on Capitol Hill, but I may have an opportunity to go to CRS, thinking in the long run that they may at one point pivot off the Hill and go into the advocacy world. And my advice to them is take the CRS position. You'll learn as much about, or an awful lot about, working on Capitol Hill. Maybe some additional things that staff may not learn working at the CRS, and make yourself maybe an attractive hire later on. So, another place. Other stuff, questions? Yeah.
You talked about LinkedIn as something that's really important in networking in DC. I'd like to hear from the two of you if you both agree with that.
I do. I'm on LinkedIn, and I will add something in here. You talked about managing your reputation in this town. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. I don't do any of that stuff because it's I want my work to speak, and the relationships that I build to speak for themselves. I don't want someone tagging me or whatever you do on Facebook, or I don't need to read someone's Twitter feed all the time. I don't want to look at my phone all the time. But I love LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn because I think there's value there, not just from a networking perspective, but from an educational perspective. Because part of my job, obviously, I manage the DC office and our 3 district offices and 14 people, and I love management and leadership studies. And You get a lot of different perspectives and things on there, and whether it's that or whether it's completely different interests, whatever your interests are, you could read about them there. And there's a value added rather than just someone sending you pictures of food or whatever it may be.
Or puppies.
Yes. So and that helps me. And in addition, LinkedIn helps me get my professional persona out there so that I just don't have a zero online presence. But I like to keep my online profile when someone types in my name in Google on a very limited basis.
So I think it complements real life. If your entire networking apparatus is LinkedIn and you don't know anybody, and these are not people you've met and have had coffee with or worked with, then it's not going to be effective. You're just that guy who keeps adding people you don't know, right? But if it's a reflection of your actual real life network, then it's a good way to leverage and figure out kind of three-dimensionally who are these people that I want to reach who know the people that I do know. And you can, as Stephanie said, you can reach out to her and say, I want to meet that person, can you help me? And you have this tool to do that, where you wouldn't necessarily know that connection exists if you were just talking to them at,
But
at
like
coffee.
you just said, I have that personal connection. So that personal connection,
Right.
super important. But back to something you just said, as someone that professionally manages other people's reputation, what you said about your online footprint, really important. And something you just said just totally pinged it. If you're just LinkedIn in general, don't add people you don't know.
Right.
Because so much of what happens in Washington, if I don't know you and I see somebody I know that knows you and I don't like that person, that reflects on you. And you may not know that person. They may just have added you randomly, but that reflects on you. And I think that comes to managing, this is a little bit of tradecraft in Washington. I am on Facebook. My security is to 0, and I do not have a single person on my Facebook friend list that I would not recognize on the street. As a press person, my views are pretty out there, right? Like I'm quoted, my name's attached to things. I'm sure you guys as well have the same thing. But you have to think about that. You have to think about the conversations you have on the metro. Ask Michael Hayden, who had his entire conversation with somebody live tweeted by a reporter off an Amtrak train. That's one thing you have in this town. So we've talked extensively about relationships, but you are only as good as your reputation and your word, because so much of it can be transactional, can be personal, but that entirely rests on, no matter what kind of relationship is, that you trust the person you're dealing with to some level. You may not trust them with your mother's secret cookie recipe, but you do trust them to get something done. And that's important. And it's an important part of how things get done in Washington, I think.